Hello, everyone.
Hey there, guys.
This is Amanda.
This is Rita.
And we're here with I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of, but you should have.
And you will.
So Rita has a story to share with us this morning.
I always have stories. I've got the best stories.
You always have stories that are like emblematic of everything that's wrong with America, which is a little hard.
It was at work.
Obviously.
And yeah, a lot of things happen at work. Obviously, because you're dealing with the public. And there was an older man that had a very large tab going, decided to help himself into our space. So he decided that it was okay to come behind the bar.
And it's against the law.
It is 100% against the law. You cannot, as a person who does not have a license, who does not work there, and also a person who's been drinking, you cannot be behind that bar. And it kind of weirded me out because I was like, what the hell is this guy doing? And it happened so quickly and it was so busy that I almost it happened. He came behind the bar. He talked to someone that was behind the bar with me and then jumped back to his table. And I was like, what the hell is that about? And it was weird because it happened so fast. And so it was slammed and I was turned around and I was cleaning some glassware and he came behind the bar again. Yeah. And he talked to another person behind the bar again. And then as he's leaving, you know, it's tight back there. And usually we know how to scoot past each other and we tell each other, we always say behind. So you let that person know, don't turn around with an armful of glassware, you know, and swing around. And he went behind me and he put both of his hands, his full hands, so that his thumbs were right above my butt and squeezed me twice. And I jumped up because I thought it was my coworker and I was about to like elbow him in the ribs. Like, that's not funny. And I see this stranger and I'm like, what the fuck? And I like looked around and I realized nobody saw it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't know what to do. I froze. I was like, do I say something or like, and two, I froze as in a way of, did that just happen?
Yeah.
And so I did end up going to that guy's table and asking him to please do not come behind the bar, that's illegal. And that if he needs anything, there's the front of the bar where everyone else is ordering. That's where you need to go.
Yeah.
And he was very put off that I asked him to not come into our space. And I was honestly really worried about confronting him because I thought it might make it worse. I thought I might get in trouble for saying something. And that went through my head. And I almost thought, you know what, just let it go. It's not a big deal. And then I was like, no, this is my space. This is my coworker's space. You're not invited. And you're not invited to put your hands on me either. And it's not okay for you to think that you can do that or not say anything and then you can do it again. Like, no.
When you told me that story, I was thinking to myself, it's interesting that when you went over to the table, you talked about the thing that was like provable, right? Like you came behind the bar, that's an illegal thing to do. And not, hey, also, don't put your hands on me.
Yeah.
Obviously we've already talked about this, so I know why, but I think it would be interesting for other people to hear why you didn't also include that.
Part of it was like, nobody saw it. Mm-hmm. So who's going to believe me? Which I think a lot of people out there who have experienced things like that, you don't say anything because who's going to believe me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's going to believe me over him? And secondly, are they going to care?
Yeah.
That's a big one. Like, will they just be like, well, it's no big deal. He was just being playful.
Yeah.
Or he's just a handsy guy.
Yeah.
That kind of like boys will be boys bullshit. Mm-hmm. And we had talked about that reporter, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen.
It went viral. Yeah.
So there was this woman reporting on like a marathon or some kind of race. And so she's standing there with a microphone and a camera on her talking into the microphone.
Doing her job.
Yes, doing her fucking actual job. And there are runners going by, obviously. And then one guy just decides to slap her on the ass. Mm-hmm. And you could just see the look on her face. She just suddenly looked completely startled. lost for words, kind of like gaped mouth.
Yeah, like that moment of, did that really just happen? And what do I do?
So I thought this was super interesting to talk about because probably about a week or so ago, I was on my way to work and I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about how they did this study/experiment
Okay.
about sexual harassment in the workplace.
Okay.
And it was all like, before they did anything, they interviewed all these women, and all of these women were like, oh, if that ever happened to me, I would say this and I would do that.
Mhm.
And it was always like, I would confront this person. I would say, like, get your hands off me. My body is my property and not yours. Like, all of this stuff, these women were like, this is what I would do. This is what I would do. And I think we all have that. We have that ability to be like, I would do this in that situation.
Yeah.
And then these women were actually like sent on job interviews, and the person doing the interview was asking all of the normal questions, and they would be like, hey, so are you seeing someone?
Oh.
And then they, a lot of the women would like get a little bit like, what does that have to do with anything?
Mhm.
But they would be like, well, no, or yes, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the interview would continue like normal, and then the guy would ask another inappropriate question, and then the questions would get worse as they would go through this, and it became very clear that perhaps employment was going to be hinging on their response to this guy's behavior.
Yeah.
And none of them confronted him. None of them were like, this is inappropriate. You need to stop asking me these questions. And what they learned about is that if they studied their brains, basically what's happening is that when confronted with what they called like hot emotions, where your response is high, like your brain actually can't do the normal tasks.
I feel like it's almost like trying to run through sand. Like everything slows down.
And you can't properly like organize what's going on. The stimuli is such that it makes you feel afraid, uncomfortable. And so your brain just flips a switch and you can't behave the way you think you would or could.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's something that people need to understand, especially men who've maybe never had that thought or felt that way before. That when you get into a situation where you suddenly feel unsafe, you cannot do the logical things you think you would be able to do, because your body basically goes into fight or flight mode. And
absolutely,
most of the time, not fight, just flight. Just get safe, get out of there, get out of the situation, keep your ass safe.
I just watched that on Hulu, the Untouchable, the documentary of some of the women and their interactions with Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, I haven't watched that.
And a lot of the women talk about that, of freezing and not knowing what to do, and then it turns into blame for themselves. Like, why didn't I push him off? Why didn't I scream? Why didn't I scratch his face off? One girl even said that. She goes, I thought I would be the girl that would kick and scream and fight. And she said, and I didn't. So why didn't I do that?
Yeah.
And it's just a very natural thing that does happen inside your brain.
And I think that that's really interesting, because I definitely have felt that way multiple times and always got mad at myself later. Like, I thought I was going to do this differently. I thought I'd be able to do this, and I wasn't. And I think we do a lot of shaming of anyone who's been in that kind of situation, because we always look at something from the outside when we're cool, when we don't have that hot emotion happening. And you can say a lot of things about what you would do when you're not in the dangerous moment. But once you're in it, no matter how small it is, you can't do those things the same as you would. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people who do have the ability to just like kick, fight, scream, whatever. But both of those reactions are equally valid just because you didn't immediately turn around and go, hey, motherfucker, get your fucking hands off me, which is what you wanted to do, I'm sure.
Yes.
Later on, especially when you're thinking about it and you're like, why did I let him do that? Which is not, no, there is no letting. He did something that was inappropriate and illegal and did it anyway. And he knew he could get away with it because men like that always know.
Yeah, they don't do those. They don't do that thinking I might get in trouble.
Yeah.
No.
No way.
And when I did, like, that split second where I stared and I was like, did that just really happen? He goes and helps himself back to his seat and he's happy, joins his party. I look around and I felt alone in a room full of people. And I was like, nobody saw it though. Okay, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And then I did look down and I said to myself, please don't fucking touch me. I said it to the bar though, as I looked down, and I looked up and this lady was like looking at me, like made eye contact with me. And she kind of just looked away. Like, who's this crazy girl talking to herself?
I wonder if that woman, I wish we could like roll back the tapes, you know,
see if she saw it.
I want to know if she did know what you were talking about and like did that thing where maybe she wanted to ask you, but was like, is that appropriate? You know what I mean?
Yeah. That silent dialogue.
That moment where the observer has choices too.
Yeah.
Should I step in and do something? Or, well, you know what? It looks like she's handling it on her own.
I don't want to get in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be messy. Yeah. And I did, like, when I was thinking, should I say anything? I just was like, you know what? No. I was like, at least I'm going to go and put, like you said, that substantial boundary, which is you can't be behind the bar.
Yeah.
You just can't. And
which your coworkers should have also said.
Yeah. I did tell a coworker. I didn't tell my boss. And then my coworker told my boss. And so he came up to me later and we had a discussion and he just said, I don't want you to feel like you can't tell us these things. He's like, I was like, well, he had a really big tab and he's like, I don't give a shit. He's like, I would have cashed him out and he can go fuck off, you know? He's like, just no one has the right to do that. So I was like, okay, well now I know. And just be like, hey, okay, for next time, because who knows if it'll happen again, maybe.
Yeah.
But now I know.
Now you know. And also, even if you had known then and you still didn't tell him, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a lot of burden to put on the person who's being harassed, to be like, they have to do all of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know what it's like, or have at least heard of people who have done quote unquote the right thing by coming forward, and then their lives are fucking shit after that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe you would have come forward and said something, but then maybe this guy made a big deal out of it and embarrassed you and said you were a liar, and then everybody in the whole room is looking at you, or maybe he went online and like really tore into you, you know, and then it becomes a huge deal that you're just like, it was 30 seconds of my life, like, can I just move on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's hard out there.
It is hard out there.
So we had to skip a week of recording.
We did.
So we apologize for that. We had more than
it was just a week. I mean, shit was going south left and right. I got sick.
Rita was really sick. If you can't already tell from her like deep, sultry voice, she was real sick.
I was real sick. I feel a lot better now. Just my throat's still catching up.
We tried to record like days after what our normal recording day is. So she shows up, it's nighttime. It's like, I've had a long day and I have more long days coming ahead. And I was like, okay, let's just get this done. And then we go to record and my computer was like, oh, you didn't update and now nothing works. So yeah, now we're back up and running and that's great. And I'm glad we're back here.
Yeah.
So everybody who's listening to this episode, it'll be post-Christmas.
Yes.
So I hope you had a good one if you celebrate, and looking forward to a brand new year. And we're almost at our 1 year anniversary.
Almost.
It'll be great.
Yeah.
So don't forget that we're still running our Wednesday giveaways, and we're going to be doing a big drawing for a t-shirt. Mm-hmm. So if you have been participating, you are going to be entered, which is really cool and very fun. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So I believe I went first last time.
You did.
So Rita's going to entertain us first.
All righty. So I am going to talk today about Althea Gibson.
I know who that is.
Do you?
I do.
The first African-American tennis player to win a Grand Slam French championship. She won at Wimbledon in singles and doubles, and she won at the U.S. Nationals.
Yeah.
How much do you know about Althea?
Psst, that. She was a real good, famous black tennis player. That is the extent of my knowledge.
So Althea has quite the story. She was born August 25th in 1927 in Clarendon County, South Carolina.
1927?
1927.
Okay, that's a long time ago.
Yep. Her parents were Daniel and Annie Bell Gibson, and they both worked as sharecroppers on a cotton farm.
Mm.
The area had been affected greatly by the Great Depression, and farmers produced record crops, but the prices fell so low that people just drowned trying to make ends meet, and they were left in bankruptcy. And I don't think people really knew how hard the Great Depression hit the ag community.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of people think, financials and things like that, but
Yeah, they think Wall Street.
exactly. And those fingers went wide. So the Gibson family decided, Althea was only 2 years old, to move to Harlem. There, they rented out a small apartment, which was located on 143rd Street, and it was sitting right in between Lenox Avenue and 7th Avenue.
Yeah.
I know where that area
Yeah, I was
is. I'm
that means
Lenox and
nothing
7th.
to me. Nothing. I'm like, I've been to New York City once, and so now I'm an expert, and I know exactly where that is, and it's an important location.
So Althea's parents, when they moved to Harlem, ended up having 4 more kids.
Oh, that's a lot of kids.
That's a lot of kids. They had 3 more girls and a boy.
So that means that they have 5 kids total?
5 kids total.
Okay.
That's a lot.
It is a lot, especially at that time when things
Yeah.
are pretty rough.
Her family life was very far from perfect. Her father had become very violent.
Oh, no.
They lived in extreme poverty. And even with her parents both working and accepting state assistance, they were barely making ends meet. And Althea wasn't really one for school either. She would constantly skip class, and she would even just miss school altogether.
Oh, I know a few of those.
Yeah. She had kind of one streak of light in her life, and it was that the block that she lived on in her neighborhood was a designated play street.
Oh.
And these play streets were done by the volunteers from the Police Athletic League. And they would close off these blocks to traffic in certain areas, and they would set up their recreation equipment. And they would teach neighborhood children how to play certain sports. They teach them how to play softball, baseball, basketball. And it was a safe, controlled environment for them to play in.
So was it temporary? Like they would do this for like a weekend or whatever?
They would, or like for an afternoon.
Okay.
Kind of like a block party, but instead for
sports.
For sports.
That's actually a really cool idea.
Isn't it? Could you imagine if your block shut down and then people brought out a bunch of games and stuff?
Yeah. And taught you skills that I mean, when people talk about, the tension between communities of color and the police, which is obviously very much warranted.
Yes.
And, those are the kinds of community outreach things that I think are more effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you get to know people as an officer, and the people get to know you, and maybe there's more trust there.
Yeah. Or if you see, this kid that you were playing softball with might be getting in a little bit of trouble, and you know them by their name, and you know that where they live, you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take you home. You need to get over here and stop messing around.
Instead of policing the community.
Yeah. Kind of a more intimate look on it. So the spot that they chose to mark off as a paddle tennis court was actually right in front of the Gibsons' front stoop. She had a natural athletic talent for softball and basketball, but she was more interested in the table tennis.
So it was like ping pong?
Yeah. Yeah. Table tennis, ping pong.
Just checking.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
So she was just 9 years old when she started playing. And by the time she was 12, she was competing in little citywide championships that they would have.
Oh.
They would set up multiple, and you'd go down, the tiers of 12 people to 6 to 4 to 2. And she was winning. She was actually really good. Her home life was still affecting her greatly. And by the time she turned 13, she dropped out of school.
Oh, no, that's not a good path.
Yeah, she began living a life that she described as a life of street fighting, basketball, and watching movies. She had become extremely fearful of her father, and so she actually spent some time living in a protective shelter for abused children.
Oh, wow.
The police athletic league supervisor and a Society Harlem band leader named Buddy Walker saw that Althea had talent, saw that she was kind of on a cusp of taking a really bad road,
Mm-hmm.
and he urged her to move from table tennis to actual tennis. So playing tennis on the court. So he bought her 2 rackets and he brought her to some friends at what was called the Cosmopolitan Tennis Club.
And that was Buddy Walker did
This
that?
was Buddy Walker.
Okay.
This club was predominantly black. It played on courts on 149th Street, which was conveniently just a few blocks away from her house.
Mm.
And Althea felt like it was a world removed from her neighborhood and like the life that she was living.
Huh.
Tennis was completely segregated at that point. The goal of the Cosmopolitan Tennis Club was to give the Black community access to equipment, to lessons, to matches, and access to a tennis community, like their own community. Yeah. And even though the club was predominantly Black, the club admitted all people, sex and race was not a matter, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, you can always, yeah. It's like, what, you know, it's obviously probably pretty logical that people who've been discriminated against don't want to perpetuate discrimination.
That happens quite a bit. Althea was introduced to and was coached by a man named Fred Johnson. He was a one-armed club pro, and she formed friendships there with club members, and they all kind of really took a liking to her, and they wanted to show her like a different side of things because she came from such a rough background.
And so when you were talking about like this was like a world apart, are the people that attend this club better off financially and with more stability in their lives?
It seemed like these were people that there were people that were a little bit more money, a little bit more advanced in education. Like some of the people that went there were doctors, they were teachers, things like that. Looking at a couple of the photos of the Cosmopolitan Club, they were very polished, very neat, classy looking people.
So yeah, it was probably just like a social class above her.
Yeah. Definitely.
And so, yeah, it provided more like a view into a world with more stability and more financial wealth.
Mm-hmm. So as she trained at the club, she was often gone for really long hours. When she would get home, her father was really upset that she was training, so he would hit her.
Ugh.
She would try to stay out even longer, trying to avoid her dad at home. And when she would get home, it would be even worse. A quote from Althea was, "Dad would whip me, and I'm not talking about spanking."
Ugh.
Yeah.
I want to be like, go move somewhere else.
I know.
Find somebody else to live with.
Well, eventually she did leave home altogether.
Okay.
She moved into a Catholic home for girls, and shortly after she was able to apply for and received a welfare grant that was able to help her get her own apartment.
Oh, good.
And she worked a couple of just little menial jobs, side jobs here and there to earn a little bit of a living. She's 14 years old at this point.
Holy
by the way.
shit. Doesn't that make you feel like I had the whole world at my fingertips?
Yeah,
kind of
14,
situation.
working, not going to school, had to leave home.
Living on her own. I mean, when I was 14, I think I still played with Barbies.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So with the help of her coaches and her friends at the Cosmopolitan Club, she developed sharp skills very quickly, and she was defeating virtually everybody that she was playing. In 1942, she competed in the New York State All-Girls Championship, which was sponsored by the American Tennis Association, and she won.
And was that segregated?
That was actually an all African-American girls club.
Okay.
So jumping ahead a few years, she's continuing to train to compete. She's competing and she's improving her game. So jumping up to when she's 19, she competed and lost in the final at her last ATA competition, but she caught the attention of 2 very important men. It was Dr. Hubert Eaton and Dr. R. Walter. So Dr. Hubert was a physician. He was a civil rights activist and an avid tennis player. Dr. Walter was a physician, and he was the founder of the American Tennis Association for the Junior Development program for African American youth.
That's a lot.
I know.
I'm
That's
like,
why
what
I
is
took
that
my time.
acronym? AADGAD. Like, I don't know what that is, like the longest name.
I know. That's why I slowed down a little bit. So there he was a coach and he was a mentor. Both of these men were African American and they were determined to break racial barriers in tennis. After they saw Althea play, they saw that she was extremely talented and they wanted to help her. So they became her sponsors, not just in tennis, but also in her life. They got her back into school. That was part of
Good.
Yeah, they're like, you got to go to school. You got to finish. They let her live with Dr. Eaton and his wife during the school year while she continued to practice. And then during her summer break, she would travel the tennis circuit with Dr. Johnson. And it was a bit of a hard transition for her socially. It was said that when she first moved in with Dr. Eaton and his wife, her table manners were so bad they made her eat in the kitchen.
When our kid moved in, it was we had to teach him. I was like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
And like, I'll never forget one of the first times we had some meal, like maybe we had fries on the table or something where we needed ketchup.
Yeah.
You know how you shake the bottle first because the liquid will be on top and it'll come out runny if you don't?
Yeah.
He didn't know that. And so he didn't do it and like squeezed it out. And it was just like this red liquid all over his plate and it ruined the whole meal. And I was like, what? Like, you didn't know that you should shake up the ketchup and mustard before you use it? Like, just like little things like
little
that.
Life skills.
That you're like, you just don't even think about somebody not knowing.
Yeah.
And then watching them struggle with what you consider just obvious.
Yeah.
And I wasn't always great about that stuff. I'd be like, really? Why don't just common sense, buddy? So I can understand the table manner problem.
I just pictured her like eating over the sink. She's so messy.
I bet she was also like, chewed with her mouth open, like,
yeah, elbows on the table.
Oh, just
big bites. Basically how I eat. She said that they worked with her gently though, like small prompts, things like that. They wanted to turn, she said, the former street brawler into a refined lady. They worked on her social skills on the court too. She didn't take very kindly to losing and she had a temper.
Oh.
And so she said, every time I lost, I just wanted to fight the other player.
Can you imagine watching that tennis match? It'd probably make tennis a lot more interesting.
It would. Her teachers actually were not expecting her to do well at all in school after coming back to high school at 19 years old.
Wait, that's how long? Like she's going to school at 19?
Yep.
When she dropped out at 13?
Yep.
Wow. Like, yeah, you missed everything.
You missed a lot.
And is she starting as a freshman?
I think so, yeah.
So she's going to be in there until she's 23? Ooh, that's weird.
Well, she proved her teachers wrong, actually. She finished and graduated in only 3 years, and she placed in the top 10 of her class.
Nice.
After high school, she enrolled and attended Florida A&M on a full athletic scholarship. While she was finishing college, Althea was doing tournaments at the same time. So not only trying to finish school, getting into college, she's also playing, training. I mean, that's a full schedule.
A lot. Mm-hmm. I'm always impressed by student athletes who manage to do this high level of competition, which is much different from high school.
Yes.
And on top of it, do well academically. Like, I can understand why one would have to give.
When I did sports in school, I just remember being so physically exhausted that my brain wouldn't freaking work when it came homework time.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit there and cry because I was so tired.
Yeah. I mean, we saw our kid do that too. He would come home and he would just crash.
Yeah.
Especially after wrestling.
Yeah. That's a lot to ask from a young person.
Mm-hmm. And he was in all those like pre-AP classes and stuff.
Oof. So while she's finishing college, Althea becomes a 2-time winner of the National Black Women's Tennis Championship. With 2 championship wins under her belt, she thought she would be admitted to the 1950 U.S. Nationals. But Althea was shut out not once, she was shut out twice.
Why?
Because she was Black.
Of course. I don't even know why I asked the question.
Most players had to get invited to play certain events. You would collect a pool of points from those events, and those points are counted at matches that were segregated. So she did not get an invitation, and no points were even possible for her to attain to get to the U.S. Nationals.
That sounds right.
So at this point, she honestly thought about giving up. She thought, this isn't going to go anywhere. School is a lot. This is a lot. She was not welcome, and she could feel it. And so she thought about giving it up.
Well, I mean, that would be very hard to be like, I have this goal I want to reach, and through no power of mine, like nothing I can do, I can't change something.
Mm-hmm.
They have all of the power, and I have none.
Yeah. Like literally, what can she do? It was at this time that she got the attention of Alice Marble. Alice was a 4-time U.S. national winner, and she took it upon herself to write like this open letter, this scathing, nasty open letter in the July 1950 issue of American Lawn Tennis. And she publicly scolded and challenged the directors of the U.S. Nationals.
And this is Alice Marble?
Alice Marble.
And was she white or black?
She was white. So to quote Alice, she said, "If Althea Gibson represents a challenge to the present crop of players, then it's only fair that they meet this challenge on the courts. If tennis is a game for ladies and gentlemen, it's time we acted a little bit more like gentle people and a little less like sanctimonious hypocrites."
Ooh,
I know. Go Alice.
Like that. That wasn't, I was like, when you said it was going to be scathing, I was like, well, is it, that was a good little burn she got in there.
Sanctimonious hypocrites. And it's true. If this is such a genteel, classy, upscale sport, then why are you being a little bitch?
you fancy yourself a gentleman, but you will not allow her to play. That's not very gentlemanly.
Nope. So this letter caused quite a stir. You know, it made everybody clutch his pearls. And the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association begrudgingly but gave her an invitation.
Okay.
She's in.
I mean, an invitation's an invitation.
Yeah. So in 1950, Althea made history by debuting as the first Black woman and the first Black person ever to get an invitation and compete at the U.S. Nationals. There, she defeated Barbara Knapp in straight sets. Her style of playing was met with mixed feelings, with everybody's eyes on her. I watched there's some silent videos of her playing in that match. And just the look on people's faces, they're almost like upset that they have to watch her play and that she's good.
And they're probably rooting for her to lose.
Yes. She was 5'11". She's tall. She had a very, very long athletic legs, and her feet were super fast. As she played with, she always said she was in attack mode. She played very aggressive. She had a very long reach, like her arms were really long and her feet were fast. So she was keeping that ball in play most of the time. And she had a very powerful, aggressive swing. And people didn't really see players playing like that, especially women. Her win would get her an invitation to the Forest Hills, also another place where no Black player had ever been. And she competed against Louise Bra. She was a 3-time Wimbledon champion. Althea competed well, but she lost in the end. And she admitted that she had never played against women of that caliber. She was actually a little shocked. And it was something that she had to adjust to. And she thought she's going to have to push herself even harder.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're the best in your league, but you're not allowed to compete against the best in somebody else's league, yeah, it does kind of hamper your ability to get better.
Yeah. She did remain unwelcome at the clubs in a few tournaments. The one that she played at Forest Hills, they made her come in through the back.
Ugh.
Yeah. So with more training, and she's pushing herself even harder, by 1952, she was ranked number 9 throughout all America.
Nice.
In the spring of 1953, she graduated from Florida A&M, and she took a job teaching physical education at Lincoln University in Jefferson City. So now she's also teaching.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a lot going on.
She does.
And you said it was 1953 when she graduated?
1953.
So she was born in 27, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. She's like 26 or something like 26.
That. Yeah. That's so young.
Well, it is and it isn't when you think about like what time, like what age most people graduate from college. It's usually like 22.
Yeah.
But she was, again, so far behind because she had to go back to high school when everybody else was already done her age.
Yeah. Her first major win was in 1956 at the French Championships. She defeated the defending champion Angela Mortimer, and she played them in Paris, and they play on clay over there.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Well, I think that's just how the original tennis courts were made. That was the material that was used.
Can you imagine falling on that?
Well, it's actually like pretty soft.
Really?
Yeah, but it chips easily.
Ugh.
And that's the thing that would really be hard to play tennis on, because once you got a chip there, then if a ball hits that chip, it'll go in a different direction than what you expect.
Yeah.
Which would be very challenging.
That looked a little, I didn't know they played on clay. She took a stab at doubles, teaming up with Englishwoman Angela Buxton to win the women's double title at the French Open as well as at Wimbledon. That year, she also won the singles tournament at the Italian, the Pacific Southwest, the New South Wales, the Pan American, the South Australian, and the Asian title in Ceylon.
You like said all these things and I was like, oh my God, okay,
So,
we're still going.
She winning.
Yeah.
With all of these wins, she earned the number 2 seed title at the U.S. Nationals.
Wow, that must have been such an achievement.
Yeah. She competed with the top seed, which was Shirley Fry. With her best efforts, she did lose that match. In 1957, this is the year that they said that this was Althea's year. She came back.
She's
hard.
30.
Yeah, I know. It's like the big, I don't know. It was like the big crescendo in her career. She competed her way all the way back to Wimbledon, and she played the shit out of this match, and she beat Darlene Hard for the win, becoming the first Black woman to ever win singles at Wimbledon.
And
which was awesome.
was she the first Black person too?
Yeah.
That's great.
Ever.
I love that a woman did that.
Yes. And she got to, the Queen of England presented her with that big, dish that they get at Wimbledon.
Yeah, the big plate.
And she said it was like a little bit of herself giggled inside, shaking a queen's hand of this girl that used to fight in the street. Was now shaking the Queen of England's hand. It was
and now
awesome.
the Queen of England has a Black granddaughter-in-law.
Granddaughter-in-law.
So times have certainly moved forward.
And she came back. So that first competition that she had lost to Louise Bruh, she came back to the U.S. Championship and defeated her there. So she said it was kind of like she wanted to beat that girl. She's like, I'm just going to come back and okay, it's done. So even with all of her success, Althea was still being denied rooms at hotels.
Ugh.
She was denied to sit at tables at restaurants. And actually, she was denied some respect from her fellow players too. Some were actually very, very nice. Some were not. One restaurant actually refused to book reservations for a luncheon that was going to be thrown in her honor after she won Wimbledon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just the audacity of that. Racism is always a little bit surprising to me, even though obviously I'm well aware that it existed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm well aware. I've read all the things. I've even talked about it. We've both talked about it.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't always, like, I still think, like, I can't believe you actually did that.
Yeah. It's like this girl is one of the most amazing humans in the U.S. at the moment in this amazing sport. And you don't even want her at your table.
And it makes me think, if that's what it was like for someone who had achieved so much, what was it like for an everyday person? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the disparity there would have been just so incredibly terrible all the time.
Yeah. Althea said, I'm playing tennis to please me, not them. When they asked her about, like, how does she feel about just being denied so many times? And she really did have to realize that she's playing for her. It's not for these other people. In 1957, she became the first African American to be voted by the Associated Press as Female Athlete of the Year. And the following year, she defended and won a second Wimbledon title and her third consecutive Wimbledon women's doubles title, partnering up with Maria Bueno. She tucked away 56 singles and doubles championships before turning pro in 1959. She wrote an autobiography that year titled, I Always Wanted to Be Somebody. So as a professional, she landed the singles title in 1960. She decided to try her, like for a brief stint, she tried golf.
Oh,
Yeah, because she was going to mix things up a little bit. Her, by 1960, she's won all these titles. She's had quite a career in tennis. So she actually made history again by doing that, becoming the first African American woman ever to compete on a pro tour. She eventually was like, yeah, golf ain't for me. So she went back to tennis. But she started to slow down. Obviously, she's getting older. The younger players are coming up. Tennis is changing a little bit. And she decided to retire.
didn't Michael Jordan do that too?
He did. He went to baseball, didn't he? And golf?
I thought yeah, I can't remember. I thought he went golf. I thought he did golf and then was like, well, I'm not so great at that.
And then he went back to basketball.
I think so.
In 1971, she was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. She stayed connected to sports throughout a number of service positions. And beginning in 1975, she started what would be a 10-year position as the commissioner for the athletics for New Jersey State.
Oh.
And she was also a member of the Governor's Council on Physical Fitness.
In New Jersey?
In New Jersey. She also was able to score a cover of Sports Illustrated and Time Magazine.
Nice.
Yeah.
I wonder if those were firsts too.
The Time Magazine cover was in 1953.
Mm.
So I'm wondering.
Yeah.
I did look up who was the first African American woman on Sports Illustrated because it did say she was the first, but it said Tyra Banks was the first.
For the swimsuit edition.
For the swimsuit edition.
Yes.
So maybe she was for just the actual
Sports
Illustrated.
The regular edition.
Alrighty. It would be another 15 years before another woman of color, Yvonne, in 1971, won a Grand Slam championship. It would be 43 years before another African-American woman would win at the U.S. Open, and that was Serena Williams in 1999.
I was going to say, like, the whole time you were talking about this, I was thinking about the Williams sisters and how they felt groundbreaking to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And still do. And I just remember, like, I loved those girls growing up and how cool it probably was for kids of that era to have Althea Gibson to look up to and, like, see a path forward, even if they're not in tennis, but in, like, a different sport.
Absolutely. Yeah. And could you imagine 43 years?
That's too long.
That's a long time.
It just shows you that the barriers that were entrenched when she was playing were still there.
And even the Williams sisters are what they deal with now.
Oh, I know. And like how much better they had to be just to get to where they were. I mean, Serena's incredible.
Oh, she's of another world on an athletic level. So Serena's sister Venus would win back-to-back titles at Wimbledon, at the U.S. Open in 2000 and 2001, repeating also what Althea had done in 1957 and 1958, which I think is really cool parallels. The sisters were actually in communication with Althea as they were competing for their own titles.
I was wondering.
They were. And
That's
like
cool.
Althea went and watched some of their matches too, which is so freaking awesome.
That would be so incredible to have the icon that you look up to
is there watching you.
Come to watch you not only achieve the same achievements, but surpass you. That's kind of cool.
I think when Serena won, she said she knew Althea was watching and she knew she was rooting for her. Like, that's powerful.
It's very powerful.
So even with all her wins, Althea didn't receive a whole lot of money playing tennis because there were no sponsorships at that time. So there was no Nike, there was no, brands that were wanting to put their name on her. So a lot of this was coming out of her own money. And then like when she was done, she didn't have any wealth to sit on.
It's just so different from how athletics are today, which is all about money.
And I think I had read in an article, someone said if she had just been like 10 years, a little bit more into tennis, she probably would have been more successful financially. She actually became, she suffered a heart attack and she became a bit of a recluse in her home in South Orange, New Jersey. She didn't want people to see her sick. So she closed herself away. And in doing that, she got worse and worse. She suffered a couple strokes as well. She gave in to her ailments, or didn't give in. She succumbed to them in September of 2003. She never had any children. She had some brief couple marriages, but nothing that really stuck. And so her legacy ends with her. My information, I had got most of it from ESPN.com, biography.com. The New York Times, when she passed away, wrote a wonderful article about her life, and a little bit from Wikipedia. And that's my lady.
Thank you for sharing Althea Gibson.
Yeah, I had heard of her name, but I never knew she had to overcome so much from starting as a child and being on her own so young, and just everything was against her.
Yeah, I didn't know about her childhood, or that she didn't go back to school until she was 19. Like, none of that stuff. All I knew is that she was a great tennis player and won lots of shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And she, the way that they had described like her playing and actually watching her play did remind me a lot of the Williams sisters, of just that real aggressive attack mode tennis style.
Yeah, that intimidates your opponent.
And it's pretty badass to watch.
Yeah.
All right. Who do you have?
Someone very special to me.
Okay. Oh, that's right.
I'm going to tell you today about Yayoi Kusama.
I don't know her.
She is the most successful living female artist in the world.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. I do want to say a little bit of a trigger warning ahead of time, a little content warning, that I'm going to talk a little bit about some physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, as well as some mental illness and suicidal ideation. Okay. So if that's bothersome to you, I really hope you listen to her story anyway, because she overcomes a lot. So Yayoi Kusama was born on March 22nd, 1929. So just 2 years after Althea, in Matsumoto, Nagano, Japan. She was the youngest of 4 children born to her parents, who were pretty wealthy. They were actually nursery owners, plant nursery, and they were also a seed company. Oh. And so they grew all kinds of flowers that would be shipped all over the country of Japan, and seeds that helped start the gardens for...
And a lucrative business.
Yes, especially because Japanese gardens are a big deal. Mm-hmm. And they would provide the plants for those gardens. Her parents' marriage was arranged, and her mom was the one who came from a wealthy family, and her dad was not as wealthy. Like, he was a lower class from their mother. So when they got married, he was actually forced to take her mother's last name.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because she had the name that mattered. And so he was, according to Yayoi Kusama, he was very emasculated by this.
Maybe a little resentful.
And their marriage, again, was an arranged one, so it wasn't a love match. And so he spent basically their entire marriage sleeping with other women.
Oh, jeez.
And he was away a lot. And her mom was a very angry woman. And she was super frustrated about this situation with the husband, and would ask, no, that's not even the word. She would make Yayoi spy on her father.
No.
Yeah, so she was basically forced to watch her father's sexual escapades and then report back to her mother. And this exposure at a really young age, she was like 4 years old.
Oh, God.
Really deeply affected her developing psyche, and it traumatized her, especially around male anatomy, which will show up later in her art. When Yayoi was 10 years old, she started to have hallucinations. She described them as flashes of light, auras, or a dense field of dots. Sometimes inanimate objects like flowers and pumpkins would talk to her. And the first time it happened, she was so terrified that she said her legs began to shake. Another time, she talked about being in the kitchen and looking at the curtains, and it had a pattern on it, like a floral pattern. Mm-hmm. And then when she looked away, that pattern was imposed on everything else she was looking at. She was like, this is like a psychosis thing. This isn't like normal. You know, this is like if you took acid. And
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is how her brain worked. So she would start experiencing these visions, and she started taking what she was seeing and putting it on the paper. So she was making these sketches. And so she'd have like a regular sketch with just these dots and patterns and stuff on them. She would actually go out and sit in the field of flowers, which is like this very picturesque moment. This little girl going with a sketch pad and sitting literally in fields of peonies and sketching. And she would sketch what she saw and what she heard because the flowers were talking to her and stuff. And this outlet was actually pretty therapeutic for her because instead of those visions staying inside of her head and making them really scary to her, she could put them down on paper and then they no longer were scary. At 11, she painted a pumpkin. She was obsessed with pumpkins. She painted a pumpkin and her painting won a prize.
Nice.
And that was the first time that she had her art viewed and liked by others, and that hooked her. She was like, this is what I want to do with my entire life. I want to paint. So when she was 13, unfortunately, World War II happens.
Oh, no.
And obviously, Japan was a major player in the Axis powers. So she was sent to work at age 13 in a parachute factory, sewing the parachutes that were used by the bomber pilots.
Oh.
And the factory was really dark and scary, and they had to work really long hours. And all day long, there were these air raid sirens and planes flying overhead, and it was really quite terrifying.
That does not sound, ideal.
So that really had a lasting impact on her. Basically, for her whole life, she was super anti-war and was really all about individual freedom, that people should be allowed to be who they are and not be forced to do things that are against their ideals. So Yayoi's mother and her they did not get along. And Yayoi's mother was actually violent towards Yayoi quite a lot. And she was also dead set against her daughter becoming an artist. And so she would frequently destroy Yayoi's paintings and sketches.
Jeez.
If she came across them.
This is a volatile home.
It's super not great. And she was insistent that Yayoi become what she considered a proper Japanese woman and that she should submit to an arranged marriage, settle down, and become a wife and a mom. But Yayoi did not want that. Her mother made a deal with her, though. Because she really wanted to attend art school. So she was like, okay, you can attend art school if you also go to an etiquette school to learn how to be a proper lady. So at age 19, she enrolled in the Kyoto City Specialist School of Arts, but she never went to the etiquette school.
Oh.
I think she told her mom she was going, but she didn't. However, she also didn't last long in art school. At the time, Japan was really anti-Western influence. And so the school wanted all of their artists to be trained and solely working in art style called Nihonga, which was 1,000-year-old traditional Japanese technique, which is cool. But Yayoi was like, this is not what I want to do. She was really interested in edgy work. So it's now, she's 19. And she was born in 29. So it's like almost 1940 or no, almost 1950. And this is the time when there's like an avant-garde art scene in Europe and some in America as well. And so she was starting to see those paintings and she started to experiment herself. And so soon she was starting to paint on walls and canvases and floors, like anything. And she would paint dots a lot of the time. And the dots that she was seeing in her hallucinations became her motif. And she started to call them infinity nets because they would like lay out like a net and they would go on forever. So she was really restless in Japan and felt stifled by the conservative rules that made everybody like have
especially
to stick
women
in boxes.
Yeah.
So she was also really tired of her mom, who was abusive and shitty. She was dreaming of going to the United States, so she would go and find any information she could about American artists, especially women. So she was at a bookshop in Matsumoto when she discovered Georgia O'Keeffe, who also painted flowers, and she's well known for her flowers sort of depicting female sexuality. And Yayoi saw herself in this. She was like, this woman's sort of trafficking in the similar ideas that I have. Somehow, and I couldn't figure out how, she acquired Georgia O'Keeffe's home address.
Whoa.
and wrote a letter to her. And the letter is really great, honestly. But she was asking her for advice about how to become an artist, especially as a girl. And she was like, I'm a girl from rural Japan. I want to make it to New York City. And here are some of my paintings. What do you think?
Yeah.
And
fairly brave.
It is.
Yeah, Georgia O'Keeffe could be like, oh, this is shit.
And also like, who are you?
Yeah.
She could have just ignored her.
Yeah.
But that's not what she did. Georgia replied.
Wow.
And the letter was actually really sweet that she sent back. She was like super supportive of Yayoi. But she said, in this country, an artist has a hard time making a living. You will just have to find your way as best as you can.
It's honest.
So Yayoi was like, all right, I'm going to try this out. So she saved up some of her funds and decided to make her way to the States. And at the time, there was still a lot of tension between the U.S. and Asian countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so, especially around currency, I guess. So she actually had to hide. She had exchanged her money into American dollars and had to sew them into her clothes so that they didn't get taken at customs.
Wow.
And she had money in her, it was in a kimono. Before she left Japan, her mother gave her a little bit of money and told her, quote, to never set foot in her house again.
Jeez.
I mean, it's a little heartbreaking.
That's heartbreaking.
At 27, Yayoi, who spoke very little English, landed in the U.S. She first went to Seattle for a year and then went on to her dream city, New York.
Nice.
She had just a few $100s, 60 silk kimonos, and her art. So her plan was to sell the kimonos or the art, whichever could get her the most money.
Fallback on the kimonos there.
Yeah. And so that's what she did. She really basically scraped by. She described that she would go to the fishmongers, like, how they have in Seattle, the men who throw the fish. So she would go and at the end of the day and collect like the fish heads and stuff that they had left behind. And that's what she would eat. She would make soup out of the fish heads and that's all she could eat. And she would beg people to show her work. But what was really interesting about her and made people compelled to be interested in her was that she was a workhorse. She would paint and write for like 50 hours in a row.
Jeez.
With no sleep, nothing. Just barely take bathroom breaks. Like she would just paint and paint and paint and paint and paint. And I think that's a little bit indicative of her mental illness.
Yeah.
She would, if something inspired her, she would get out of bed in the middle of the night and start painting until it was done. And she didn't do drafts. When she started, that was the painting. And that was going to be the final draft. Because she would see everything in her mind before she would ever start. She turned out an incredible amount of work, which was all detailed and intricate. And she began to experiment with repetition. Patterns, dots, and they would repeat over and over. And they would go beyond the canvas so that they seemed like they never had an end. Again, her concept of infinity.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, she's in New York City. She's like begging people to look at her work.
Yeah.
And she's kind of a spectacle of a person.
Really?
Which we'll get into a little bit more.
Okay.
And so she starts to draw the attention of a few prominent artists and critics at the time in the scene who liked her avant-garde work. And so she became friends with a guy named Donald Judd. And he was at the time a very famous and respected minimalist artist. And so he bought one of her first infinity net paintings for $75, which some people at the time thought that was way too much money for her painting. Mm-hmm. And the two actually lived in the same apartment building and they started to just spend lots of time together. And he became one of her biggest advocates in the art world. Mm-hmm. He was like, you've got to see her work. She's incredible. You got to show it. You got to do this. And that meant that she got a leg up in the world.
Yeah.
Around that same time, she also struck up a friendship with an artist and filmmaker named Joseph Cornell. And he was real weird.
Yeah.
He still lived with his mom. Okay.
Okay.
He's like well-respected, famous, probably has some money, but lives with his mom. And what kind of drew him and Yayoi Kusama together is that they were both real not into sex.
Okay.
They were both really repelled by it, in fact, right?
Yeah.
I told you that she got really fucked up by seeing her dad screwing other women.
Mm-hmm.
So she refused to have sex. She didn't want to be in that intimate position. So they basically had a romantic relationship and an artistic relationship with each other without ever having sex.
There's a name for that, isn't there?
Well, it's like, I guess, asexual.
Yeah,
kind
but
of.
I've seen couples that are happy that way.
Yeah, totally. But and they would sketch each other in the nude. They weren't like afraid of being naked. They just didn't want to have sex.
Yeah.
So they had a very close relationship. But once while visiting Cornell, so they're at Cornell's house, which he shares with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yayoi was there in like this beautiful embroidered, she was incredibly stylish. So she was wearing this beautiful embroidered outfit, and his mom was really upset that he was dating a woman and came with an entire pitcher of water and poured it over Yayoi's head.
Whoa. Okay.
So
just kind of a little glimpse into that mother-son relationship right there.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It was a little like Bates Motel situation.
Yeah.
And that was when Yayoi was like, yeah, I'm good. That relationship cooled off after that. She then really started to experiment and explore sex and sexuality in her work. And, she had been making those parachutes when she was a kid in the factory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she had become really good at sewing. So using that background in making things, sewing, she started doing something very different.
Okay.
That no one else had ever done before. So she would take like a chair, like think of like a big lounge chair type situation in a living room.
Okay.
And she would sew all of these fabric penises, and then she would sew them to the chair, so the chair would be covered in penises.
Okay.
And then she would paint the whole thing white.
Oh.
It's real weird looking. It's very cool. So she just started like stuffing these phallic things and then attaching them to ordinary objects.
Okay.
So that everything became like a field of penises.
Weird.
Oh yeah, it's sort of experimental.
Yeah.
And this became known as soft sculpture and had never been done before.
Wow.
So,
which it's done a lot now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Soft sculptures are pretty common now, but that was like a new thing. Everybody had been working with clay or paper mache or whatever.
Metal, whatever. Yeah.
And not soft materials, because it wasn't what you thought of when you thought of sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
Her, as she did with everything, this now became her obsession. And she began to affix these phalluses to everything she could possibly do. So one of her most famous pieces was a rowboat that she and Donald Judd had found abandoned in a New York City alleyway and dragged it to the studio. And once again, she affixed these phalluses to everything, painted it all white, including the oars. So the oars had like the handle was fine, but then the actual oar would have all these penises standing up from it.
Yeah.
And this particular art piece, people were just mad about. They were like, this is incredible. And in fact, at this moment in time, it's the 60s, she becomes as famous as Andy Warhol.
Wow.
But she wasn't making money like Andy Warhol. Because sexism.
Yeah.
And racism. And her work's becoming well known, but she isn't.
Okay.
So like she debuts this rowboat piece. There's actually a photo of Andy Warhol in the room looking at her piece. She was also really into having herself photographed with her work. Mm-hmm. So like you couldn't separate the two.
Yeah.
So there was, at the time, a lot of these male artists started seeing her work and ripping off her ideas.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, classic story right there.
Uh-huh. I'm going to tell you about a few of them that are enraging. So there's this artist named Klaus Oldenburg, and he was this guy who made paper mache sculptures. And his stuff was really avant-garde, and he would like often do like a male's chest and like paint it like a tux, but then like hang it in the air. Sort of like disembodied male figures, just really interesting stuff, but always in hard materials.
Okay.
So after he saw her couch with the penises on it, he decided to create his own soft sculptures. And when he debuted them, he became a critical darling for his unique and innovative ideas.
Oh, fuck that.
And
Dude. Wow.
Yep. No one's ever done this before except Yayoi Kusama did, but whatever.
What they really mean is it doesn't exist until a man does it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Andy Warhol attended the show where she debuted that rowboat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Covered in phalluses. There's a picture of him in the room. So in the room that she put it on display, she'd also done something else that no one else had ever done before. She had taken photos of the boat beforehand and created a patterned wallpaper that was the image over and over and over again. So the boat was inside of a room covered with the boat.
Whoa.
Which was this really conceptual idea of her infinity idea, right? Just this continues to repeat. And no one had ever done a pattern, basically, a wallpaper pattern of the art. So Andy Warhol does this exact same thing in his next show where he creates what is now known as his famous cow wallpaper, which was a photo he took of a cow and then he made wallpaper out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he was like lauded as this innovative and unique and creative thing. And he did not credit this idea at all to Yayoi Kusama. Nevertheless, she kept creating and she also began to make her art more political and she started to do more spectacle things. So I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
So in 1963, she created her first mirror/infinity room. So in it, what she had done is she created a complex pattern of mirrors that reflected each other to no end, like because it's mirrors. So you just keep going and going. So inside the room of mirrors, she hung these neon colored balls from different heights and reflected among the mirrors, the space seemed to have no end and no beginning. And there was just this really huge, bright burst of color with these neon balls. And she showcased this installation at the Castellane Gallery in New York. So I'm going to have the gallery owner actually talk about this mirror room piece the first time that he ever saw it.
She was taking away your ability to focus, breaking all boundaries of space. And the exhibitions that I had, in particular the Peep Show, that did the job. It was an octagonal room, it was painted black, and there were openings where you could stick your head in. And the ceiling of it set up a series of lights. The rhythm of that machine was faster and faster. Up till Kusama, there were many artists from the Renaissance on who were involved with perspective and infinity, but it was all a fake because you knew, you as a viewer, you were always aware that you were the master, that it was a painting that was encompassed by a frame, and the artist was playing with space, but it wasn't enveloping you.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to share him talking about that because I thought he would do a better job of describing it than I could. So this idea of this mirrored room where everything is reflecting, that idea was then ripped off a few months later. When an avant-garde artist named Lucas Samaras put on an exhibit of mirrors at the Pace Gallery, which was a much more prestigious gallery that garnered him more fame, more accolades, and more money.
Wow.
So this was like the final straw for her.
Mm-hmm.
She was absolutely betrayed by what was going on. Like every major idea she had kept getting ripped off, and then the men who were profiting from it just kept going on with their career and becoming more and more famous, and she was just relegated to the sideshow. So this is the first time that she attempts suicide, and she throws herself out the window of her apartment.
Oh my gosh.
But her fall is broken by a bicycle below.
Ouch.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't pleasant, but she survived. And after this, she started to try to get attention, because her work was not getting as much attention as she wanted it to. And these men were getting more attention for what she had already done.
Yeah.
So she starts doing
infuriated. Yeah.
Yeah. And imagine how desperate you would feel.
Yeah. I'd paint myself red and run through the street.
So basically that's what she started doing. She started doing these things that she called happenings. They were these audacious street performance art pieces, and she like would go to like Central Park and put on these kinds of things. So in one of her more famous happenings, she went to the 33rd Venice Biennale, which was like this big art exhibition that like every country sends their best artists to, and they put on this thing. It's a really big fucking deal. So she crashes it.
Oh no.
And what she did is she bought 1,500 reflective glass, like mirrored balls, so you could like look into it and see your own face.
Mm-hmm.
And she created what she called the Narcissus Garden. And she began selling the balls at the Biennale for $2 a piece, saying, "Your narcissism is for sale."
Oh my gosh.
And the organizers were fucking pissed. And they came out there and they're like, "You have to go." And they were just so offended that she was, quote, selling her art like hot dogs.
Oh my gosh. She's not selling it in the confines of how they feel it should be sold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she's also, offending them by like, literally, she put 1,500 balls on the ground
Yeah.
of their displays. And she was really into, at the time, it's the 60s, really into this like free love stuff. And she's got some weird conceptions about sex. Okay. So, and she's exploring that in her art. So then she starts doing these happenings with naked people everywhere. Okay. And she would actually, I thought this was pretty clever, she would place them in conspicuous places like Central Park or whatever, and then paint them covered in her dots. But she would do it at the time. Like they would like
show up
disrobe.
Oh, okay.
And then she would start painting them. In one such piece, she actually took over the sculpture garden at the Museum of Modern Art and had the models stage themselves in a fountain in the same poses as the nearby sculptures of men like Picasso. So like there'd be Picasso's statue and then her naked model in the fountain covered in dots. She also staged in 1968 a happening that she called Homosexual Wedding. And Fleetwood Mac and other people were there, like performing. And
Whoa.
She created a wedding dress for two and married two gay men.
Wow.
Yeah, which was obviously 50 years ahead of time.
Yes.
She also started making her own clothes, started making fashion. And she would create pieces that had similar motifs. And she started making these clothes where she would cut out holes like dots.
Okay.
But where the breasts and butt cheeks should be.
Okay.
They became very popular among gay men. She became so popular among the gay scene in New York that she actually opened up a gay club.
Wow.
Like she was very well loved by gay people in New York. So these bold and sometimes gimmicky acts were bringing her a lot of notoriety, but not positive notoriety.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time.
Are people almost seeing her almost like more as a nuisance than an influence?
And not taking her seriously.
Okay.
Like they felt like these were cheesy, jokey, stupid shit that like a real artist wouldn't have to do.
Okay.
And in fact, the news of what she'd been doing made its way to Japan.
Did dear old mom hear about this or what? What happened?
It like the Japanese press wrote about her and like would include like a photograph of her with these naked people. And sometimes she was naked.
Mm-hmm.
And the journalist who wrote about her said she was a disgrace to the country, that she was a scandalous exile. And one journalist had even called for her killing, that she should be killed. Her parents were so embarrassed of her that when they knew that something was going to be published about her in the newspapers or in the magazines, they would go to the store in their local town and buy up all of the copies and take them home and burn them.
Jeez.
She was considered such a disgrace in Japan that the high school she graduated from removed her name from the list of alumni.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Is it that bad, honestly?
Well, if you think about how conservative it was at the time, it was to them. And she was in both her adopted and home countries known as not a serious artist and not a legitimate artist.
Mhm.
And she became known as a spectacle, a fame whore, and someone who didn't have any artistic pedigree. So this is not great.
Mhm.
And you can imagine that there was one piece she did that she talked about where she, she's trying to make lots of statements, and sometimes they just don't work. So one of them, she dressed as like a traditional conservative Japanese woman, like wearing a kimono, had everything from head to toe. But instead of like the traditional parasol,
Mhm.
she had taken a black umbrella, just like a regular black rain umbrella, painted it white, and then like stuck plastic flowers to it as sort of like a commentary on how this was like a farce and
Mhm.
it's fake. And then she walked like 60 blocks of New York and just had a camera follow her.
Jeez.
Yeah. But you can tell like she had an idea there, but everybody was like,
What's your point?
yeah. What are you doing?
Mhm.
So in 1972, her former boyfriend and fellow artist Joseph Cornell died.
Oh.
And she was already not doing great mentally. And this was like sort of a catalyst for her to continue to spiral into becoming more and more upset with what's going on. And we're now in the 70s. And in the 70s, there was this big backlash against the like culture that had happened in the 60s.
Mhm.
And so America was becoming a lot more conservative and in fact elected Richard Nixon. And so she was becoming really disillusioned by America's budding conservatism and the Vietnam War and her lack of success as an artist, particularly after her contemporaries like Andy Warhol were really respected and frankly had lots of money.
Mhm.
And she got neither of those things. So she was like, I'm losing my shit, and decided that she had to go home to Japan. So she returned to Japan in 1973, and just a year after arriving, her father died. So she's really it's not been her best couple of years. And she's now back in Japan, completely unknown. Like prior to leaving, she'd had a couple of exhibitions that had gone really well, and people were her paintings were well received in Japan. And now she's coming back and she's like nothing.
Mhm.
No one in the art scene knows who she is. No one cares about her. And she's rejected by her country, her family, and by the art establishment. And also, Japan is still quite conservative at this point, and her
Mhm.
art is just too indecent.
Too off the wall. Yeah.
And her hallucinations and panic attacks are just coming one after the other. And one night, she tried to die by suicide again in 1977. But she survived again, and this is when she decides that she needs help.
Mhm.
So she checked herself into the Seiwa Mental Hospital, which is where she continues to reside today by choice.
Wow.
The hospital she moved into was one of the few at the time that was experimenting with art therapy. And this became obviously the perfect spot for her.
Mhm.
And she felt both encouraged and really safe at this hospital because they believed in cultivating her art. So she set up an art studio across the street and she would like go to the studio, create art, and then come back and go home to the hospital. And she was like becoming super prolific again, like painting and painting and painting and painting. And she didn't just paint and create installations, she also started to write. So in 1977, she published her first book of poems. And then in 1978, her first novel called The Manhattan Suicide Addict. And in between 1983 and 1990, she wrote and published 7 more novels.
Wow.
I have spent 3-4 years on one.
Yeah.
So between 77 and 1990, she had done 9 books
Jeez.
in 12 years.
That's a lot.
Like when we talk about her being prolific and like working around the clock, like that's how productive she was.
Jeez.
So after spending nearly 2 decades now in absolute obscurity, Yayoi Kusama saw a resurgence in popularity when there were a few places that reached out to her and said they wanted to do some retrospectives of her work. So the first of them was in 1989 at the Center for International Contemporary Arts. This created a bit of a stir with people being more interested in the art world in her work.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was another artist in Japan who had found her work and was like, holy shit, why isn't she a big deal here?
Mm-hmm.
And so this Japanese artist really pushed for her to become the representative artist at the 1993 Venice Biennale.
Oh, really?
The place where she...
Go to the scene of the crime.
So she's and Japan for a while was like, no, we can't. And then they were finally convinced that she should be allowed to represent them. Her mental health, though, was still pretty fragile, so she was accompanied by a psychotherapist. And so she went to this Venice Biennale, and people saw her work, and they were like, oh my God, her work is fucking amazing. And she's so prolific and so unique, and now everybody's interested.
Mm-hmm.
It's the 90s. She's been making art for 40 years.
Wow.
And she's just now getting some recognition. And actually, there was this documentarian named Heather Lenz who really wanted to make a documentary about her. And this was in 2001. But she couldn't get any production companies to fund it because they said it was too arty.
Okay.
So the documentary wasn't made. But that's still you could just tell there was this movement to really look at her work.
Mm-hmm.
So new installations began being put in all of these really prestigious and important galleries. So her work was starting to be permanently displayed from Mexico City to New York to Rio de Janeiro to Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Which is where I saw her work.
Oh, really?
In 2008, the painting that she had sold to Donald Judd for $75 was sold at an art auction for $5.1 million.
Holy shit.
Which was set a record for a living female artist. And then she used to make these enormous pumpkin sculptures, and those started selling for $500,000 or more each.
Jeez.
And then social media happened. And her installations are perfect for Instagram.
Oh.
Because you can go in those mirrored rooms and take cool photos of yourself. And she uses lots of bright colors and these phallic couches. And it's all just really interesting and neat and makes for great photos. So people on Instagram started taking lots of photos of her work. And this started making her basically a household name. Her installations now in 2019 frequently see thousands of visitors who wait hours in line for a 30-second or 45-second viewing.
Jeez.
At the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C., just last year, I think it was, people stood in line for more than 2 hours just to step inside an infinity room for 30 seconds.
Wow.
In the past 10 years, her work has now been featured at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Tate Modern, the Guggenheim, the Whitney, and many, many, many more.
Wow.
I saw her work at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. I think it probably would have been around 2013, maybe.
Okay.
When I went in to see her work. And they have 2 permanent installations at the Mattress Factory. One of them is a mirrored room with these mannequins who've been painted white, and they're covered in red dots, and so is the floor. And so when you stand in there, you see yourself among these mannequins, and there's just these dots everywhere. It's really neat. And the other one is a similar motif, but it's I believe it was gold lights.
Wow.
It's really cool. And she's also started to work with fashion houses like Marc Jacobs and Louis Vuitton to create clothing and accessories with her patterns.
Wow.
And in 2017, the Yayoi Kusama Museum opened in Tokyo.
Oh, that is awesome.
She has her own museum in Tokyo where students from the rural town of Matsumoto, where she's from, come to view and admire her work on regular school trips. So she's finally now achieved the admiration, fame, and fortune in her home country and the U.S. and everywhere in the world. So because she was finally an established, legitimate artist, Heather Lenz, the documentarian who wanted to make the film in 2001,
Yeah.
was able to make it in 2018.
Oh, nice.
So the film was called Kusama Infinity, and it was released in 2018. It's incredibly gorgeous. It's this beautiful artistic documentary that I highly recommend. So at 90 years old,
Wow.
Yayoi Kusama is still an active artist, creating new art every day, and still lives in the mental hospital across from her studio. So I want this art curator to talk about Yayoi for a minute. This is the curator. Her name is Frances Morris. She was the curator of the Yayoi Kusama exhibition at the Tate Modern. And this is her discussing how Yayoi's mental illness feeds into her art, but also is kept in check by her art.
Kusama is now living in a mental institution, but by day she occupies across the street in a busy suburban neighborhood of Tokyo a very well-appointed studio facility where she has a team of assistants, and she has a space for painting, she has a space for her library, her archive, and every morning she gets there and she's the consummate professional, and she works from 9 to 6. And I think there's a sort of a managing madness about Kusama, which is so utterly sane, which is really interesting. She's used her trauma, she's used these experiences in her past. She's been able to harness experiences that might drive other people insane to enormously productive ends. She's an extraordinary person in that way.
Wow. Very intricate.
Yeah, and that's like one of those things where she had this idea, sat down with this canvas, and just started doing what she was doing, and that's going to be the final product.
Wow.
When she's done with it. This past April, in 2019, one of her paintings from 1959, called Interminable Net Number 4, was sold at a Sotheby's auction in Hong Kong for 62.4 million Hong Kong dollars, which translates to 7.9 million US dollars.
Holy shit.
This sale, among many others in recent years, has made Yayoi Kusama the most successful living female artist. So I want to end with Yayoi's own words about her life and the power of art. This is from a poem she wrote called A Message of Joy from Yayoi Kusama. Among the waves of people, I have managed to survive this long life. How many times did I think about putting a knife to my neck, seeking death? I collected my thoughts and got up again. I wish for life's bright sunshine. I want to live forever. And she will.
Yeah, she will.
She will live forever now because her art is everywhere. Like literally everywhere. I was watching that show on Netflix, The Glow Up.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this makeup artist, Judge. He's the bald man with the little like curly Q mustache.
Mm-hmm. He
was wearing a sweatshirt that was inspired by Yayoi Kusama.
Wow.
It was covered in colorful dots, like big dots.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
There
everywhere
you
I look now, I see her work. I see how prolific and prevalent it is. But if you just like search her on Instagram, thousands of photos.
Wow.
From all across the world of people going in to take photos of her work. She also, I wanted to include this last quote too. She said, I hope that the power of art can make the world more peaceful.
Seems to have worked for her to still use it. Like she said, use it.
Mm-hmm. I think that now in her studio, she has assistants and staff and whatever, and they just make sure that she can just
That's
sit.
what she needs. Yeah.
All of these reporters that I watched people talk about it, and like they would like go to interview her, and they would walk in and she'd be like working on something, and she wouldn't even look up. She'd be like, I'm working on this. And they would just have to sit and wait for her to finish. And then when she'd look up, that's when the thing would start.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of my information from a really great website called The Art Story, and an article for the BBC by an author named Kath Pound called Yayoi Kusama's Extraordinary Survival Story. I used some Wikipedia. Tim Adams at The Guardian wrote this article called Yayoi Kusama, the world's favorite artist?
Nice.
Question mark?
Oh, question mark.
Her biography on Britannica. And I did watch a documentary, Kusama Infinity, which I was able to rent on Amazon Prime. And then the Tate Modern, the videos that the clips we just heard, that came from the Tate Modern's YouTube channel, a video called Yayoi Kusama Obsessed with Polka Dots.
That's awesome.
I can't wait to share her work on Instagram with our followers. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are like, oh, I've seen that in person.
That's really cool. She's a very neat lady.
Yeah, describe what she looks like.
Oh, she's very petite. She's right now wearing a bob bright fuchsia colored wig. She looks fly as fuck, actually.
Yeah.
She's got like a little fur coat on, and yeah.
And in the video, when she's making her work that she's working on with Sharpie, she's wearing like a fucking like hot pink dress with black polka dots
It's very
on it.
now, like with what people are wearing now and doing with their hair and makeup. And yeah, she's far beyond her time.
She's incredibly stylish and always has been. And that is her signature red wig.
Really?
Like she wears, it's like a red hot pink color.
Yeah.
And that's what she's been wearing for years.
I like it. Oh, some tough ladies today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who've overcome a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am so glad everybody is listening, and I hope you continue to listen into the 2020 New Year.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will be putting out some things this year that are a little different. We're really excited about 2020 and hope you guys come along for the journey.
Yep.
Thank you to Lucas McIntyre for your editing work.
Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you to Jennifer Finch of L7 for our lovely theme music. And thank you, listeners, for a great 2019.
Have a good year. Exhibition.